She smiled as if nothing had happened. But she had stolen my inheritance. That Thanksgiving, I walked into her house with more than just a pie, and by the end, she would wish she'd never done it. Thanksgiving was always my mother's favorite holiday. The smell of roasted pecans, the sound of laughter spilling from the kitchen, and the sight of her two daughters, me and my sister, helping her set the table. At least that's how it used to be. This year, I wasn't even invited. My name's Marissa Doran, and 3 weeks ago, I found out my sister Harper had stolen everything our parents left us. Not just money, my mother's jewelry, the lake house deed, and even the vintage piano my father promised would be mine. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a clerical error. It was betrayal, carefully planned, signed, and sealed behind my back. When our parents passed away within 6 months of each other, I handled the funeral arrangements, the medical bills, the endless paperwork. Harper couldn't even show up half the time. "It's too hard," she'd said. "I'll help when I can." But she helped herself to everything instead. The morning I found out, I sat in the lawyer's office, hands trembling, as he explained that Miss Harper Collins was granted full ownership according to the updated will. Updated. That word hit like acid. The lawyer avoided my eyes. "Your parents signed an amended document 6 months before your father passed. Your sister brought it in herself." I could feel my pulse pounding. My mother couldn't even hold a pen by then. My father was bedridden, barely conscious. There was no way they could have signed anything willingly. And Harper, she knew that. I remember walking out of that office into the cold November air. The streets lined with bare trees, their branches scratching the gray sky like bones. I'd never felt so hollow. I wasn't angry yet, just numb. Anger came later, slow, patient, and sharp. It started the day she called me. She actually had the audacity to invite me to Thanksgiving dinner. "Hey, sis," she said, her voice sugary sweet. "I know things have been tense, but family is family. You should come. It's our first Thanksgiving without Mom and Dad." I almost laughed. Our first Thanksgiving? She'd stolen their legacy, erased their wishes, and now wanted to share turkey and pie? Still, I said yes, because revenge doesn't come from rage. It comes from strategy. That night, I opened a bottle of wine, sat by the window of my tiny apartment, and made a list. Every item she took, every lie she told, every signature she forged. I knew I couldn't undo the past legally, not without proof, but I could make sure she'd never sit comfortably in what she stole. The next day, I drove to Willowbrook, the small town where we grew up. The place looked exactly the same. Frost on the rooftops, golden leaves melting into the gutters. But everything felt different. The air was heavier, the memories sharper. Harper still lived in the lake house. My lake house. The one my dad built by hand. The one he'd promised would always belong to his artist daughter. I parked across the road and watched from my car. Through the wide kitchen window, I saw Harper laughing, holding a glass of wine, her hair perfectly styled, her husband Ben arranging decorations behind her. They looked like a magazine cover, wealthy, happy, untouchable. Except everything in that house was a lie. That's when I decided, if she wanted me at her dinner table, I'd come. But I'd bring something she wasn't expecting. For the next week, I prepared. Not with weapons or threats, but with words, proof, and presence. I started by calling Mr. Larson, the notary who'd handled our parents' paperwork years ago. He was retired now, but his memory was sharp. When I mentioned Harper's name, his voice changed. "I remember your father," he said quietly. "Strong man. Very proud of you. He told me you'd be the one handling everything when the time came." "Did you sign anything new for him last year?" I asked. There was a pause. Then, no, not for either of them. That was all I needed. Still, I wasn't going to burst into dinner waving accusations. No, Harper thrived on appearances. So I'd ruin hers in the one place she felt most powerful, the family table. The morning of Thanksgiving, I dressed carefully. Navy blue dress, simple pearl earrings, nothing flashy. I wanted to look composed, not desperate. I printed copies of the old will, the one that left the estate split evenly, and placed them in a neat envelope inside my bag. Then I baked a pie. Mom's recipe: apple cinnamon with brown sugar crumble, the same one Harper used to burn every single year. When I arrived, the driveway was full. Harper had invited half the town. I forced a smile as I walked up the stone path, each step rehearsed, steady, calm. The door opened, and there she was. Perfect smile, expensive perfume, false warmth. "Marissa, you came," she said, hugging me as if nothing had happened. I hugged her back. "Of course. Wouldn't miss it." Her husband Ben greeted me with a nod. He'd always been polite but distant. Their 2 kids ran past me laughing. It stung, seeing them in that house filled with my parents' things, the old family clock ticking in the hall, the oak table from our childhood kitchen polished to a shine. Dinner was set in the grand dining room overlooking the frozen lake. Candles flickered. Silverware gleamed. Harper had truly outdone herself. She tapped her glass. "Before we eat, I just want to say how grateful I am this year. For family, for blessings, for new beginnings." I almost choked on the word grateful. Everyone clapped. I smiled. Then softly I said, "It's beautiful, Harper." Mom would have been proud. She looked at me, surprised by the sincerity. "Thank you, Marissa." I waited until the main course, until the laughter rose, until the wine loosened everyone's tongues. Then I reached into my bag and set the envelope on the table. "What's that?" Harper asked, her tone still sweet but eyes wary. "A memory," I said. "I found it in Dad's old study. Thought you'd like to see it." Ben leaned over. "What is it?" I slid the top page out, an old scanned document dated 2 years before Dad's passing. The real will. Both signatures clear, notarized by Mr. Larson. For a moment, the room froze. Harper's smile faltered. "Where did you get that?" "From the lawyer's archive," I said evenly, "and from Mr. Larson himself. He remembers everything, including the fact that Dad never updated the will." A soft gasp rippled through the table. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." I kept my voice calm, measured. "It's strange, though. The new version, the one that gave you everything, didn't have his notary stamp. Or Mom's handwriting. Almost like someone forged it." Harper's fork clattered against her plate. "Are you accusing me of something?" she snapped. I tilted my head. "I don't have to accuse you, Harper. The truth's already written." Ben's eyes narrowed. "Harper?" She turned to him, panicked. "Ben, don't listen to this. She's just bitter. She lost her share and now she's lost my share?" I cut in softly. "You mean stole my share?" Silence fell over the table. Even the kids had gone quiet. Harper's cheeks flushed crimson. "This isn't the place." "Exactly," I said. "But you made it the place when you invited me here and pretended nothing happened." She stood abruptly, knocking over her wine glass. "You have no proof." I reached into my bag again and pulled out my phone. "Actually, I do. I recorded Mr. Larson's statement. He's willing to testify if needed." Ben's jaw tightened. The guests shifted uncomfortably. And in that moment, Harper realized she'd lost control of the story. I leaned back, voice steady. "You didn't just steal from me, Harper. You stole from our parents' memory, from everything they built." She didn't respond. She just stood there, face pale, hands trembling, and for the first time, the house felt quiet. Peaceful, almost. I took a small bite of pie. "Mom's recipe," I said softly. "I brought it for you." Then I stood, gathered my things, and left the table behind. As I walked out, I heard Ben's voice, low and angry. "What did you do, Harper?" The door shut behind me, and the cold air hit my face like freedom. But revenge, I would soon learn, doesn't end at the table. It begins there. I didn't sleep that night. Not even a wink. The envelope in my bag, the truth in my hands, and the simmering rage inside me made it impossible. I kept replaying the dinner over and over in my mind, tasting the shock on Harper's face, hearing the sudden hush fall over the table. For once, she wasn't in control. That thought alone sent a thrill down my spine. But I knew the battle wasn't over. Harper wasn't going to fold quietly. She was clever, manipulative, and used to getting her way. I had to stay one step ahead, and that meant planning the next move carefully. Revenge wasn't a sprint. It was a marathon, and I had to pace myself if I wanted to see justice done. The next morning, I woke to a flurry of missed calls and texts. My phone was blowing up with messages from mutual friends, distant relatives, and even neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years. "Marissa, is everything okay? Harper called me crying last night. What happened?" "Are you serious?" "Did you really show that will?" I read each one, feeling a mix of vindication and horror. The truth was spreading faster than I'd anticipated, but I couldn't let it spiral out of control. This was delicate. One wrong move, and Harper could spin the story, painting me as the villain. I decided the first step was to confirm my legal footing. I contacted Mr. Larson again, explaining the dinner and the reactions. He was willing to draft a statement verifying the authenticity of the original will, and to clarify that any document Harper submitted later was not valid. "That should be enough to start reclaiming what's rightfully yours," he said, his voice steady but somber. "But be careful, Marissa. Family disputes like this can escalate faster than you think." I thanked him and hung up, feeling a surge of determination. Harper had underestimated me. She thought she could erase me from our parents' legacy in my life. But she had no idea how meticulous I could be when pushed. Over the next few days, I watched her carefully, almost like a predator observing its prey. I didn't show any outward signs of anger. I went about my business, met friends for coffee, and even pretended to be cordial when Harper called or texted, thanking me for coming to dinner and being understanding. Inside, however, I was simmering. I knew the story was just beginning. I started small. At the office where Harper worked, she had a high-profile job in a real estate firm. I discreetly emailed some key contacts, forwarding information about the questionable legal documents and suggesting that anyone working with her proceed cautiously. I didn't reveal my identity outright, but the hints were enough to make people pause. She would hear about this, and the unease would gnaw at her confidence. Then came the family. I reached out to distant cousins and family friends who had been close to my parents. I showed them the will, explained what had happened, and let the truth speak for itself. People were shocked. Many didn't know the extent of Harper's actions. Whispers began to spread. Invitations to social gatherings quietly dried up. She was slowly being isolated, all because she had chosen greed over family, Harper noticed. I could see it in the subtle texts she sent me, dripping with faux concern. "Marissa, can we talk? I feel terrible about everything." "I don't know why you're doing this." I ignored most of them, replying only when necessary, keeping my tone calm and polite. That was part of the strategy. She could not provoke me into lashing out. Her guilt, or at least her fear, would do the work for me. Thanksgiving was approaching, and I knew she would try to salvage her public image at the next dinner. But I wasn't planning on attending. Instead, I prepared a smarter, quieter form of revenge. I made copies of the will, had Mr. Larson's notarized statement, and printed them neatly in a folder labeled "For Reference." Then, I sent a copy anonymously to her lawyer and a trusted family attorney who had known our parents well. I could almost hear Harper's gasp when the documents arrived. She would feel exposed, cornered, and desperate. That's the beauty of subtle revenge. It doesn't scream. It whispers, and those whispers echo louder than any shout. Meanwhile, I focused on the symbolic part of revenge, the lake house. I returned one evening under the guise of picking up some old family photos left behind. The house was quiet, the only sound the faint creak of the floorboards. I wandered through the rooms, remembering the holidays, the birthdays, the laughter that once filled these walls. This was my inheritance too, and seeing it twisted in Harper's hands fueled a quiet, controlled rage. I placed one small item carefully on the kitchen counter, my mother's cookbook, the one she had used for decades. The pages were yellowed but intact, and it was full of little notes in her handwriting. I left it open on a recipe page, like a breadcrumb trail, a reminder that the house, and our parents' memory was not hers to claim. The day before Thanksgiving, I received a text from Harper that made me smirk. "Marissa, I just want you to know I never wanted this to get ugly. Can we meet and talk?" I stared at it for a moment. The arrogance, the assumption that she still had control, I replied with a single line. "Talk? Sure, at the table where everyone can see." She didn't respond immediately, but I knew the message had landed. When Thanksgiving morning arrived, I stayed home, quietly baking pies and preparing a simple meal for myself. I wasn't going to step foot in her dinner this time. That was her mistake, the centerpiece of her illusion that she was untouchable. Instead, I coordinated with a few family friends and distant relatives to arrive early, under the guise of holiday visits. They carried copies of the will, statements from Mr. Larson, and quietly, like shadows, started talking among themselves in Harper's hearing. The whispers grew. One relative asked, "Did you see these documents?" "Marissa was right all along." Another murmured, "I always suspected something was off." "This explains everything." Harper's smile faltered. She tried to laugh it off, but the tension was thick enough to slice with a knife. Guests exchanged glances, some openly questioning her actions. By mid-afternoon, the entire dining room was buzzing with conversation about the authenticity of the will. Harper attempted to regain control, clinking her wine glass and insisting, "This is ridiculous. I have the legal documents. Everything is fine." I arrived quietly, dressed in a dark green dress, my hair pulled back. I carried my pie, the apple cinnamon one Mom had loved, and set it down in the center of the table. Every eye turned to me, some in shock, some in silent anticipation. "Happy Thanksgiving," I said, voice calm, even. "I hope we can honor Mom and Dad today by telling the truth." Harper's face twisted. What are you doing here?" I smiled politely. "I thought I'd join you, and maybe share something important." I handed her a copy of the real will, along with Mr. Larson's notarized statement. The room fell silent. The energy shifted. People leaned forward, reading, whispering, pointing. Harper's hands trembled as she picked up the documents, eyes darting from me to the witnesses around the table. You can't," she stammered. I interrupted softly. "I didn't come here to accuse. I came to make sure everyone remembers what Mom and Dad wanted. And that includes both of us, Harper. Not just you." Her husband, Ben, finally spoke, his voice sharp. "Harper, this is serious. We need to get legal counsel immediately." Her lips parted, no words coming. I knew then that the tide had shifted irrevocably. Throughout the evening, whispers of disbelief and shock swept across the table. Some guests quietly expressed support for me, some looked concerned for Harper. But everyone understood one truth. Harper's reign over our parents' legacy was crumbling. By the end of the night, Harper was pale, quiet, and defeated. She had tried to control the narrative, to maintain appearances. But in front of witnesses, in front of family, she couldn't hide the truth. As I left the house that night, I felt a calm I hadn't known in weeks. It wasn't joy, it wasn't triumph. It was a quiet satisfaction, the kind that comes from knowing the right thing was done, justice had been served, and I had remained above the petty anger that could have consumed me. I walked to my car, the cold November air biting my cheeks, and I thought of Mom and Dad. They had always wanted fairness, honesty and love to guide our family. Tonight, in that tense, uncomfortable room, I had honored that. Revenge had been sweet, yes, but not cruel. I hadn't destroyed anyone. I had revealed the truth. And that, I realized, was far more powerful. As I drove home, the moonlight glinting off the frost-covered roads, I felt the first genuine sense of closure since our parents passed. Harper would have to rebuild her life, and I would continue mine, carrying the memory of justice done, a family legacy preserved, and the quiet knowledge that sometimes the best revenge is simply showing up and letting the truth speak for itself. And somewhere deep down, I knew this Thanksgiving would be remembered, not for the turkey or the pies, but for the day the scales finally tipped, And Harper realized that stealing from family comes at a price far greater than money. I didn't sleep well that night either, though not out of anger. This time it was anticipation. I knew that the truth had been revealed at dinner, but what I didn't know was how far the ripple would spread. Harper's mistake wasn't just the stolen inheritance. It was thinking she could hide it forever. And now, every lie she told was hanging in the open, exposed for anyone to see. The next morning, I woke to messages flooding my phone. Friends, relatives, even some of Harper's co-workers reached out. "We saw what happened," one text read. "Thank you for standing up." Another said, "Your parents would be proud." The pattern was clear. Harper's credibility was unraveling, and mine was solidifying. I had intentionally stayed quiet in public after dinner. Silence was a weapon. It allowed everyone else to talk, to see the documents, to process the truth without me having to shout it. And it worked. By mid-morning, whispers about Harper's actions had reached her social circle. People were hesitant to trust her. Some were even avoiding her calls. I spent that day methodically planning my next steps, not to hurt her physically, but to ensure that the consequences of her actions were tangible. Harper couldn't undo what she did, but she could face the social and legal fallout, and that was justice enough. First, I contacted the family attorney. I explained everything in detail, providing copies of the real will and Mr. Larson's notarized statement. Within hours, the attorney confirmed that Harper's so-called updated will was invalid. She had no legal claim to the inheritance she'd tried to take. The attorney emphasized that she could face legal scrutiny for forgery. Meanwhile, I sent copies to the financial institutions that held the inheritance, accounts, investments, and the deed to the lake house. Each institution confirmed receipt and assured me that all future transactions would require my authorization, not hers. Finally, the lake house, the symbol of our parents' love and legacy, was secured. I hadn't needed to storm the gates or yell at her. The law and truth had done the work for me. Harper, of course, realized this immediately. Her calls became frantic, her messages desperate. "Marissa, please, can we resolve this privately?" she begged. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I ignored her, letting the weight of her actions settle on her conscience. She had brought this chaos upon herself. I didn't need to give her words of punishment. The consequences were unfolding naturally. By the evening, the local news had picked up the story. Distant relatives had mentioned the dispute online, and it went viral. Headlines like "Family Feud," "Sister Claims Stolen Inheritance," and "Thanksgiving Drama Ends in Legal Showdown" began appearing. People were shocked by the betrayal, by the audacity of stealing from one's own sibling, and by the calm, collected way I had handled it. I watched from my apartment as messages poured in from strangers around the country. Some offered condolences. Others shared stories of similar betrayals, and a few even offered advice or support for handling the legal side. For once, I felt truly seen and vindicated, not by anger, but by the truth prevailing. Harper, meanwhile, was spiraling. Her husband, Ben, confronted her after reading some of the articles. "You can't do this, Harper," he said sharply. "This is serious. You're going to face legal consequences if you don't come clean." She tried to argue, tried to spin her story, but he refused to listen. That was a moment I had secretly anticipated, the collapse of the illusion of control she had built. She was alone now, facing not just the law but the disapproval and disappointment of everyone she cared about. Days turned into a week. Harper attempted to reach out to mutual friends, to colleagues, even neighbors, but the trust she had squandered was gone. People were hesitant to associate with her. Invitations to gatherings dried up. The social isolation compounded the legal and financial consequences. I stayed quiet, focusing on myself. I returned to my apartment, my artwork, my job, my life. For the first time in months, I felt the weight lifting. I had fought this battle not with rage, but with strategy, patience, and poise. And it had worked. But the moral justice wasn't just about social isolation or legal scrutiny. It was also about internal peace. One morning, I walked along the frozen lake near the lake house, the frost crunching beneath my boots, and thought about my parents. They had always valued fairness, honesty, and integrity. I realized that by handling this situation the way I did, without succumbing to anger or revenge for its own sake, I was honoring their memory more than Harper ever could. I mailed Harper a final letter. Calm, concise, and firm. I didn't gloat or threaten. I simply outlined the facts, referenced the legal confirmations, and stated that I expected no further contact unless it was regarding resolution and restitution. The letter was not for punishment. It was a formal closure. Weeks later, Harper called one last time. Her voice was subdued, stripped of the arrogance she had carried for years. "Marissa, I understand now. I'm sorry. I really am," I listened quietly. Then I said softly but firmly, "Harper, apology is meaningless without action. You have work to do to rebuild your integrity. That's where your focus should be." She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She simply acknowledged the truth and hung up. And that was it. By Thanksgiving the following year, I hosted my own dinner. The table was modest but filled with people who had witnessed the truth, people who valued family in its truest form. There was laughter, warmth, and a sense of peace. No drama, no tension, no secrets. Just genuine celebration. I served Mom's apple cinnamon pie. It was perfect, golden, fragrant, and full of memory. Every bite reminded me that justice had been done, that truth had prevailed, and that the bonds that mattered most were those rooted in honesty and love. Harper's absence was a quiet echo, a reminder of the choices she had made and the consequences they brought. She had taken from me, but in the end, she had only lost herself. I had lost nothing, except perhaps the illusion that family is always safe. But I had gained clarity, peace, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that integrity always wins in the end. And as I looked around the table at the people I cared about, I realized something important: revenge, when handled wisely, isn't about destruction. It's about truth, exposure, and letting natural consequences fall into place. It's about showing up calmly and letting the facts speak louder than any shout, any tantrum, or any lie. That Thanksgiving, I didn't just reclaim my inheritance. I reclaimed the essence of my parents' legacy, the honesty, the fairness, the love. And for that, I was truly grateful. Harper's story continued, of course. She faced legal scrutiny, financial restitution, and the slow rebuilding of her reputation. But I didn't dwell on it. Her consequences were natural. My focus was life, not vengeance. And so, as the night ended, I stepped out onto the frost-covered porch, inhaled the crisp air, and felt a sense of closure I had longed for. The past had been addressed. The betrayal had been confronted. And the future was open, full of possibility, grounded in truth, and free from manipulation. This wasn't just a story of revenge. It was a story of patience, strategy, and the ultimate triumph of integrity. And perhaps most importantly, it was proof that even when someone betrays you in the most intimate ways, you can rise above, reclaim what's right, and still hold on to your moral compass. That Thanksgiving, the table was full. The pies were perfect. The truth was finally served. And for the first time since my parents passed, I felt whole. If you thought this was intense, hit subscribe for more shocking family stories. See you in the next one.